Creative people are the trusted communicators of our society, a society that is ridden with more fear, loneliness, and anxiety than ever.
We recognize that creative people and those championing their work should be honored for who they are and treated with care as they devote their lives to articulating the human experience.
My name is Samantha Jervey.
My name is Emily Falvey.
Together, we're the co-founders and co-host of Mind Over Melody, a podcast focused on wellness for artists, songwriters, and music industry professionals.
We pray our conversations can be a safe place for you to rest, grow, contemplate, and be reminded that your wellness matters first and foremost, and ultimately leads to the kind of creativity that sustains and abounds.
Thank you for listening to Season 1 of Mind Over Melody. We'd like to give a special thank you to our sponsors for this season, Truist and Porter's Call, and to our editor, Cooper Carr. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or a qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental health issue. If you are experiencing a crisis or need immediate help, please contact a local mental health service or emergency services. Other resources are available on our website at mindovermelody.com.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Mind Over Melody podcast. This is Sam Jervey speaking, and I am here with my lovely co-hosts, Emily Falvey, as well as Caroline Shermer of Meant to Eat, a registered dietitian who we're so grateful to have with us today. So, Caroline, thank you for joining. We've got a really special just conversation lined up for our listeners.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. I was so excited when y'all reached out, and I can't wait to see where the conversation goes today.
Absolutely. So to kick us off, I'm just going to start by reading your bio, just so our listeners know kind of who we have the honor to be with today. Caroline, as mentioned, is a registered dietitian, eating disorders specialist, and many of her clients' biggest cheerleader. She founded Meant to Eat nutrition counseling with one mission: to empower women to learn all that they are meant to eat and meant to be, apart from disordered eating, excessive exercise, and body image concerns. She lives in Nashville and is passionate about pouring into her local community, which I love. There is something that, well, I won't spoil it yet, but when I visited the office the first time, Caroline, that part about pouring into the community, there's something unique to your office space that we'll reserve that I'd love to touch on later. But before we dive in to that, I just love to hear, can you tell us a bit about where you're from, what your story is, and then what led you to become a dietitian?
Yes, well, I always get panicky when someone asks me where I'm from because I grew up moving every 2 or 3 years.
Me too, Caroline. I get very stressed out by that question. I usually say I don't have a hometown, which is kind of dramatic, but
I mean, but it's true. I'm like, what version of my hometown narrative do you want today?
Exactly.
So yeah, I lived a little bit in Missouri, a little bit in Texas, but I actually went to school here in Brentwood, Tennessee. And so, and I live in Nashville now. So we're going with Nashville today. And how I came to be a dietitian, I was, lucky and fortunate enough to receive care from another registered dietitian. So when I was adolescent, I fell, into some disordered eating, and luckily I had an open conversation with my parents. They sought out support for me, and for that I'm so grateful. And the care and the wisdom and the relationship that my own dietitian offered me really, really transformed my entire life. And so I went into college knowing exactly what I wanted to do. I went to the University of Missouri, and everything was just so focused on how can I become an eating disorder dietitian. And so, to become a dietitian, you have to do coursework, and then you also have to have an internship. And my internship was with Mizzou Athletics. So I was the lead nutrition intern for their sports program. And then I also was at the McCallum Place, which is a residential PHP and IOP treatment center for eating disorders. So I had a really immersive experience in a lot of different realms of dietetics where disordered eating pops up. And I just learned so much. And to this day, I'm grateful for all those experiences.
Well, I feel like just as you were blessed by your experience getting the treatment that you needed, I feel like you're probably blessing so many people in a generational kind of way. So that's really a joy to get to see you like pouring out of that overflow of your heart. I just think that's really beautiful.
And the courage it took to like go to your parents at that age, Caroline. Like I shout out to your parents because they were doing something right to provide a safe enough environment, right, for you to say, hey, I need help. So that's really beautiful.
I know, it really is. Really is.
As women, I feel like we all have our own journey with body image and just kind of undoing those societal narratives. So we're really grateful for the work that you're doing to help clients become more comfortable in the skin that they're in. What do you think is the biggest need in the community that you serve right now?
Oh gosh, there's so many needs, but I think the one that really stands out to me and that I have really grown meant to eat nutrition counseling around to serve the most is the need for community. I think even in such a big booming city like Nashville, it's also a pretty transient town. And so a lot of my clients are really, really, really lonely. And I think we're told from a very young age that in order to be accepted, in order to belong, you kind of have to fit a certain mold, or you have to offer the world something, or you have to look a certain way, you have to have certain things. And if we combine all of those things together, I think Nashville in particular, there's just a lot of loneliness. And so I think a lot of people need community. We heal in relationship. That's one of my biggest go-tos in terms of like my therapeutic approach is relational, because we have really good research actually that says the best predictor of positive outcomes in disordered eating treatment is the clinician and client relationship. So with that, I have dinner clubs, or I have body image groups, or fear food challenge groups where we all can get together and just say this is hard and like move forward together. And it's really beautiful to like have the position I do to like watch the connection happening, and knowing that I had a part in orchestrating that. It's really sweet.
Wow.
I love that.
Yeah. I mean, I think to your point, Caroline, like community is so pivotal, and the research foundation of so much healing, disordered eating, and just, I think sometimes we think healing is an isolated or like, I need to step away. I need to take care of myself. I see that a lot. And it's like, you have that choice. There are times, yes, where you may need to be more introspective and contemplative. And, you know, how do you let people in as part of your healing journey? How do you be witness through this time and also support it? Held accountable, encouraged. So that's really, really special. You had mentioned, which definitely I find there's a lot of parallels between athletics and entertainment, you know, especially the music business. So there's a natural kind of synergy there. It sounds like that you've been working in that space for a long time. And obviously being in Nashville, having, you know, done your adolescent years here, I'm sure you've had a lot of experience encountering those in that space as well. So I'm curious, with respect to the entertainment industry, given that that is really the focus of who we're speaking to here, given that the entertainment business places so much importance on physical appearance, especially with women, right? There's a whole different level of expectation.
Yeah.
What do you think people can be doing to practice radical self-acceptance?
That's a really good question. And one concept I'll talk a lot about with my clients in this space is the concept of self-objectification, or just objectification in general, because there's a difference between the world or the society or the industry telling us we need to perform a certain way, look a certain way in order to be successful in order to keep going, in order to have livelihood, like all of those things. And then we almost become a part of that like system, if you will, and internalize it. And that's where self-objectification happens. Like I'm only worthy or valuable up to this point. And all of these metrics matter, and all of my performance outcomes matter. And if I'm not living up to these certain expectations, then what? It really erodes our self-worth. I mean, it erodes so much of us. And I think it's really tricky when, being a performer, that's part of our identity. But then like, what do I view me as a performer to look like, to be like, to perform like, to, all those things. And so it gets really tangled, right? So now my identity isn't just that I'm a performer. It's like everything that a performer means to me or has been told to me should be. I don't know if that's right grammar, if y'all are following along with like the concepts I'm trying to bring out, but
absolutely.
Yeah, it's really, really, really hard. And so I think one of the first steps is just like naming these different systems that are in place and recognizing our part in them and like how they affect us and how we've learned this. I'll often ask clients, hey, what's body image to you? And a lot of clients will knee-jerk respond, it's how I see my body. And what's really cool is I educate clients all the time. Hey, body image isn't just how we see or view our body, how we perceive other people to perceive our bodies. It's what we've learned about bodies growing up. If you go to any Disney movies, it's pretty clear what the good, beautiful princesses look like versus the villains or the girls who are lonely and unsuccessful. There's a very clear difference, and we're taught that. We're programmed, we're brainwashed from a really young age. Body image is also how we feel in our body. And so the second step would be, how can I blend my sense of identity and my value system? Like I want to perform, I love performing, and reclaim it for ourselves. So will I actually have a much better time performing? Will this feel so much more synergistic if I am well fueled versus I'm trying to maintain all of these rules that I should be doing to maintain this idea of the performer I should be? Because how we feel in our body, right? The somatic experience in our body, the different emotions we feel in or about our bodies, those really affect our body image as a whole too. And so the first step I would say is to learn and educate about, wait, what is body image and why do I feel this way? What is self-objectification? And then two, really reclaiming, well, what is my experience in my body and how can I live in a more values aligned way? Because that's actually going to be protective of my career in this industry.
Yeah. You when you said somatic experiencing, I was like, I hear so much of different therapeutic modalities and whether that's been intentional, and it sounds very much like, especially with your IOP inpatient, experiences, but like cognitive behavioral therapy, flavors of definitely somatic experiencing, like where does that land in my body? Maybe, I don't know if you do any parts work, but I feel like some of that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like internal family system parts work. I love it. So I just had to reflect that back because it is a very integrative experience of like, okay, where did you get these schemas? What are the narratives that are driving this for you? Yeah. And then how do we parse that out? Not only as this is a part of you that learned to survive, but also where does that live within your body? So I just thought that was really cool as you were speaking.
So wonderful. Yeah, I think from my own journey as a public facing or, person in the entertainment business as a songwriter, I'm after sustainability. Like that's kind of something that I come back to all the time is figuring out how to make this lifestyle livable for me. And what I hear from what you're saying and what I've followed on your social media, which is just really life-giving and wonderful, is, trying to make life, there's so much heaviness that we already experience with societal narratives and with what we've had to pick up through what you talked about, Disney movies, from the time we're very young children, we're inundated with these ideas. And I just love that you are so committed to having such a loving approach to it all and with such care. And so I just want to give you props for that.
That's so kind.
the next question, and this may even, the language of it may be interesting, but I'd love to hear about what the concept of healthy eating means to you, and if that's even the correct terminology to be using as far as, you know, how we should be taking care and nourishing ourselves in a way that is, you know, meaningful and good to us.
Absolutely. Well, language is such a funny thing because, you know, we could say healthy, you know, eat healthy. And depending on what, you know, news outlet you're following or what social media page you're on, that all means something different, which is so confusing. I can't stress enough how eating is so complicated. And I think that's
so
where
hard.
it's so hard. And that's where so much shame comes in. It's because it's like, I should know how to eat. Like everyone has to eat. It's like the same as using the restroom. Like you should just know how to do it. No, like when you're a toddler, you go through a potty training boot camp. But like, we never really do that with food. We just have all of these different news outlet or news sources just like coming in at us at all time, telling us what we shouldn't do. And again, it's so disconnecting from the self. It's so disconnecting. And so, you know, with this concept of like healthy eating, I could go a number of ways, right? Partially my work with clients is to educate on like what is healthy eating. There's something to be said that there are foods that are going to really nourish our body. They're going to be really nutrient dense. There's going to be foods that are really energy dense. There's going to be foods that are really fun. There's going to be foods that are cultural. Food is so much to so many, and we really have to honor all parts of food in order to really have like the reverence that we need to have to repair our relationship with food. When we try to just lump food, bad, good, unhealthy, right, wrong, we miss so much, and that's where we feel the chaos. And so healthy eating, really, to be so simple, I would say it's eating in a way that's very values aligned. And that's going to look different for each person. And I think that's okay. And so at Meant to Eat Nutrition Counseling, we really get to know that individual as a whole person. And with that, provide good nutrition education, couple that with their personhood, what matters to them, their value system, blend that all together to really set a framework for what's healthy eating for them.
Yeah, the values is so key. And I don't know, as you were talking about like even this concept of, okay, we do this as children, right? We're going through boot camp for potty training. Like it's not as clear or it's not as explicit. For some people it is, right? Some people, our parents are explicitly saying, don't eat this, don't eat that. And that's a whole other thing that I think you're then kind of processing down the road. For a lot of people, it's maybe a mix, right? It could just be modeled, or it could be a mix of, oh, this was like really explicitly told to me, or it's just what I saw my parent do. And given that you specifically work with women, and I think we spoke very briefly about this, and it's kind of taking a side road, but just that relationship between, I think these things are so like early instilled, right? From the moment, because our mothers are our first sustenance. They're our first providers. And there's a book called Mother Hunger that kind of touches on this with respect to nurturance. I don't know if you've read that. But I'm so curious, kind of, is there a theme that you've seen in disordered eating patterns, or kind of, if that's the right way to even ask the question of just what have you noticed? It might be a couple of themes of, okay, a lot of my clients grew up in households where, you know, this was modeled, or this was an unspoken expectation, or this was a spoken expectation. I hear the term, I have an almond mom a lot of the times, just truth be told, when working with this population. And so given that you really are niche and seeing this really needed space in the space, like, I'm just curious if you've seen any themes or trends.
Absolutely. I mean, everyone has a relationship with food. Some people might be a little bit more like naive to that concept because their relationship with food is like so beautifully neutral that it never really occurs to them like, oh, how am I relating to food? Because they're just like coasting, which like, if that's you, that is, I love that for you. But for a lot of us, that's not the story. And, you know, that being said, I think a lot of parents have their own relationship with food because they grew up in similar systems or similar cultures that we did. And then if you jump up a generation, how did their parents approach food? What did they learn from that? And so absolutely, it gets passed down genetically. There are genetic precursors to developing disordered eating or an eating disorder. Alongside with, you know, I see a lot of clients that have co-occurring anxiety, depression, OCD. But also there is a environmental or like a modeling part and component to it as well that can get passed along. And, you know, again, the concept of community and belonging, a lot of children look to their parents for, okay, well, what do we do in this situation? It might all be so unspoken. But what do I do? How does mommy look at herself in the mirror? People always say me and mommy look alike. Mommy says XYZ, and before you know it, these little girls are, you know, conceptualizing their bodies in relation to how their mom conceptualizes their bodies. And, you know, it's just heartbreaking when you really look at that. You know, I meet my clients where they're at. So sometimes it makes sense for us to be so angry and like vent out that anger of like, oh, why did my mom do this and say these things? This is terrible. And there's also, you know, moment or room for grief there too. Like, oh, wait, my mom is in her 60s and still struggling with this too. Oh, because that's really heavy too. Because I'm in my 20s or 30s working on this right now. She didn't. So it makes sense that there's lots of feelings all the way around, and we definitely hold space for that. But yeah, families definitely impact our relationship with food. And, you know, that even gets me thinking to like your work family, right?
Yeah.
I work with people in the industry, and I know a huge part of the work is like the after show, right? We're going to bring all this food in. You got to eat to participate. In order to belong, we kind of have to engage with these food rituals or rhythms, if you will. And if I don't, then maybe I don't belong or I can't connect as much as I want to. And so, you know, I think thinking about disordered eating, sometimes we can think of restriction, but like the binging or overeating or really just eating from a place of disconnection comes in too. And I think it's hard when we feel like we have to eat in a certain way to belong. So that just came up in my mind too, right? We can talk about literal family, but then like the work families too in this industry can get really tricky too. How can I model their behavior or engage in this so I belong, so I fit in?
Yeah. And alcohol too. The caloric intake. In that setting.
True. Yeah, in the music industry specifically, that is just an abounding, you know, I've literally, and I never really, you know, we have those talks in elementary school, the dare, you know, people peer pressuring you to do something and you learn all those coping mechanisms. And to be honest, I had a pretty sheltered childhood. Like I didn't get pressured to drink very often. And then now in my mid to late 20s, I feel more like I need those dare resources now than I needed them then. Like I need to figure out creative ways to be like, no thanks, because
so true.
There really is this pressure now. Of if you don't take a shot with us, or if you don't drink with us, if you just go out, I could go to the bar and drink a soda water and lime and people would have no idea. But if there's an active, like you admit that you're not drinking, I don't know what that is, but I feel like that's something that culturally we could call into question, because I think I just know so many people who probably most of us, alcohol, it kind of nets negative. I don't really ever have nights where I'm like, wow, I am so glad that I drank because I feel awesome this morning and I didn't say anything I regretted. You know, it's just kind of like, why are we pressuring each other to do this so much? Because really it's not the best, in my humble opinion. Anywho, that's not a judgment on those who do. I just think there's definitely a moderation that can exist and an acceptance of meeting each other where we're at. Who knows?
Absolutely. And alcohol, your relationship with alcohol goes hand in hand with food. We're talking about that all the time in my sessions. That could be a whole nother episode of how alcohol affects your relationship with food. And yep.
We probably need it, Caroline, so we may be following up with you.
Yeah, part 2. Because I'm sorry, I wasn't going to, Chopped after being at the bar. You go to Cookout, right? Like,
yes.
Right.
Yes.
It's terrible.
Absolutely. Yes, or having a freaking quesadilla at 11 from the bar itself, Anywho. Caroline, I want to know, I think I've seen this in some of your posts about your personal relationship with exercise in college. I'd love to know, even the way this question's worded is, what's the ideal relationship between diet and exercise? I kind of want to rid of like we've talked about, the good and bad narrative. But I think the word sustainable comes to mind of what's a sustainable relationship between diet and exercise that can exist for people who are on this journey to figuring out their body image.
Yeah. Well, exercise is a stressor on the body. We undergo exercise in hopes that stress would actually be therapeutic, would actually help our bodies become healthier. That being said, like in the music industry, you need to be really cognizant of what your stress levels are, and not just emotionally, but literally on your body. How are you recovering? Because performing is a sport in of itself. And so I think, again, when we just go on social media and we see these blanket recommendations like you need to work out 5 times a week for 30 minutes. It's like, oh my gosh, okay, I need to do this. Well, you don't take into account then all of the different factors going on in your life that might differentiate you from that blanket recommendation. Like, hot take, but really a lot of blanket recommendations online are probably not applicable to you at all. But I think it can make us really vulnerable to that anxiety. I need to be doing more. I need to be doing more. And really, an unhealthy relationship with exercise is best described by the quality of that exercise rather than the quantity. So excessive exercise is very different from compulsive exercise. Compulsive exercise says, I have to do this to be okay. I have to do this to be good. I have to do this to relieve my anxiety. I have to do this to, keep up with the rat race of it all. Whereas excessive exercise is just for a long duration. But both are problematic. Not that they're like wrong or bad, but they have really serious side effects, like emotionally and physically. And so I just love that fact, because I think a lot of people can minimize their own relationship with exercise because they don't work out that much. But yet if it's constantly fueled, or you constantly are feeling guilt and shame around your relationship with exercise, that's still not good, and you deserve better than that. So all that being said, an ideal relationship between, nourishing and exercise is, if you can fuel it, do it, but you have to be able to fuel it. And then again, like, is it values aligned, or is it now disconnected and way more of that compulsive, I have to, shamey kind of quality? Because that's going to be a really slippery slope, and it's really hard. And if you're listening to this right now and you're like, it is hard. Yeah, it is hard, girl. Yeah. It is hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure the comorbidity of the obsessive compulsive, I'm sure that is where you see a lot of that overlap, and just the anxiety too. I mean, obviously OCD being an anxiety disorder, but just this belief that I am only as good as my performance, or what I look like, or how fit, how toned I am, especially when, one thing that comes to mind is like, we're always talking about how great Carrie Underwood's legs look, right? And it's like, these are the pillars that we have, I think, especially for female artists, but I know this is true for male artists as well. And then brands just generally in the industry, songwriters. Emily, I know you understand that on a visceral level, and also executives, even like when they become these people and brands. So kind of going back to a few things that we touched on. Like, we talked about the community piece, and there's a really unique and special resource that you have specifically in your office space that I'd love for you to share a bit more about. But also the family piece, right? Like, you had kind of touched on, like, okay, what are some of the warning signs of disordered eating, or maybe the roots of disordered eating? So this is really a two-part question, right? Like, what are some of the warning signs? And then what are resources available? If someone is actively experiencing this, listening today and like raising their hand, like young you saying, hey, I need help and I want to invite people into my recovery.
Oh, good question. And I think this is such an important question because there's so much stigma, or there's this idea of what an eating disorder or disordered eating looks like. And all of my clients, especially in the first session, usually have this box of what disordered eating is, and they're always outside of it because of the stigma, because of our eating disorder comes along for a reason. No one develops an eating disorder who doesn't need one. And what I mean by that is, we all go through different things in our life. And let's say one day you either skip a meal or you overeat a little bit. And for that, like 5 to 10 minutes after, you just feel relief, or you feel some sense of a high or joy when otherwise you've been feeling really down lately or out of control. Your brain recognizes that, lights up and says, wait a second, I just did that a little bit with food and look how I feel now. That's kind of great. But then life happens and you come down from that again. And then you remember, even if it's unconscious, oh, when I did this with food, it made me feel better. So I act on that again. It gives me that feeling. And before we know it, we're kind of stuck in that cycle. And it's a really hard cycle to get out of. And some warning signs that you might be stuck in that cycle where food is serving a emotional function in my life that brings me some sort of relief and also brings me chaos there shortly after, would be chaotic eating, right? If I feel like I get really, really full really fast, or really hungry out of the blue, and I'm like, what's going on with my body? I can't stand how it's always all over the place. That's a huge warning sign that there might be some disordered eating. If you're feeling guilt and shame, or a lot of second guessing about your food choices, if you're feeling like you look around the table to make sure everyone else is ordering something compared to what you're ordering, and that's okay and that's good, and that you're not going to be called out even by your own disordered eating voice, that's another warning sign. If you're constantly comparing yourself to other people, again, if you feel like you have to work out all the time, if you're compensating for food, this can look a million different ways, but this could look like skipping breakfast because you have brunch later and you need to save the calories for that, or trying to burn off food or get rid of food via multiple ways after eating. If you feel like you're really scared of getting sick, this one can come up a lot when you're on the road and traveling a lot. I don't want to eat at this gas station even though it's our only food available, or I don't want to eat this food that's been sitting out for so long because I don't want to get sick. I think that's a really reasonable fear. It makes sense, right? Just like the fear of weight gain might make sense, but where does that fear now hurt me or impact me negatively because I can't fuel my body appropriately? So those are just some different warning signs of disordered eating or a relationship with food that is harboring hurt. And what are the resources? So I would always recommend looking for someone who is a licensed therapist or a registered dietitian that specializes in eating disorders. And one of the ways you can look at this is for the CEDS credential. So CEDS, that stands for Certified Eating Disorder Specialist. The tricky thing with disordered eating is because a lot of people experience disordered eating themselves, they find some sort of recovery, they want to pour back into the world. And that's not a bad thing, but I think it can lead to a lot of opinions about how to recover from eating disorders rather than what's actually appropriate and good. And so if you already have a complicated relationship with food, I cannot stress enough to be so protective of who you receive support from, because there can be a lot of harm done, a lot of harm done when you're already so vulnerable. And I mean, honestly, my email is out there. If you are in a different state that I'm not licensed in, reach out. I am on tons of listservs, and it doesn't take much time for me to connect you with someone that I know to be sound. So you can reach out to me. Or Nashville also has a really great nonprofit group called Renewed Support. It is a coalition of eating disorder professionals that put on free support groups. There's something every single week. There's an art group, processing group, nutrition group, you name it, which is a really, really sweet resource. And then lastly, Mentee Nutrition Counseling. We do see clients in person in the Green Hills area in Nashville, but also nationwide. We have something called the Here and Now Closet. So again, when we're talking about food and exercise, we're talking about people's bodies. And a lot of times people's bodies change in all different ways in the recovery process. And that can be really costly on top of paying for eating disorder treatment. And so in our office, we have a closet of over 400 pieces of clothes of all different sizes, where you can donate clothes to if you need to do some grief work and part ways with clothes that used to fit. But you can also come and receive as many clothes as you want. So there's no limit on how many items you can take in one visit. And that's a free resource. You just have to reach out, make sure I'm in the office and can let you in and see the closet. But once you're there, that space is yours to use. And then if those clothes no longer serve you, you can bring it back and get some new ones. So it's the Here and Now Closet to meet your body where it's at here and now.
So special.
What a cool thing. This is my first time hearing of it. And so I'm just mystified by there's just such a level of care to who you are and what you do. And I think that's so beautiful. I think you're probably making more of an impact than you realize. And so thank you for what you do. I think that in my own personal journey, this has been kind of a cross I've had to bear. And so I appreciate your just care and kindness and your willingness to show up for people no matter where they're at. Even just the here and now aspect of showing up whatever moment you're in, whether you're the happiest and most content you've ever been in your body or just really disjointed and dysregulated around your body. I think that's really just an extraordinary thing. So thank you.
Thank you.
I would love to know, I feel like we already just kind of touched on one even maybe, but what are some of your favorite self-care and coping mechanisms to prescribe to your clients?
Yeah. One of my favorites that I feel like I've been saying a lot lately is don't believe your automatic thoughts. Right. I really do believe that like our brains and bodies like try their hardest to work for our good. And sometimes that looks like misplaced anxiety. Right. So if I'm out to eat and my brain is like, don't eat the chips and salsa, I might be like, oh my gosh, brain, you're right. I shouldn't. That's bad. That's right. Like, oh, thank gosh, you told me that. And I really ask my clients like, hey, take that automatic thought and just think, like, what might that be trying to tell me or communicate here that it tells me food is like the best route to like fix this issue or like heal this emotion, when in reality, maybe I just need some like validation, or I just like need to see myself in this moment, right? Like maybe I feel vulnerable with this new group of girls at this Mexican restaurant. Is not eating this chip gonna actually help that? Probably not. But would recognizing that for myself and just say, Caroline, like you're feeling so vulnerable right now. Like, of course, who wouldn't be in a group full of new girls that are all having great conversation and you're not sure how to like slip in a cool sentence or tell a funny joke, whatever. Like that is vulnerable because then you're like actually meeting the underlying need there and you won't need your eating disorder as much anymore. So that's one of my favorite things is, hey, how can we not believe those automatic disordered eating thoughts and really get to what's actually going on and more effectively meet your needs? Because your eating disorder is meeting your needs, just not super effectively. It works till it doesn't. And that's where a lot of clients end up coming to see me, where it's like, it's not working, but it does sometimes, but it's not working. And yeah, self-care, again, plugging in with the community, I think because there is so much food noise and there's so many unhealthy body expectations, I think it makes sense that we would want to sometimes isolate in this work that we do because it's so vulnerable. Like, what if I finally am plating myself an appropriate meal and someone comes up and says like, whoa, I can't imagine you're eating all that. That's kind of crazy, right? Like, oh, how devastating. So be really protective where you need to be protective, but then allow yourself to be really vulnerable where you can be vulnerable. And that is plugging in some group work, confiding in one friend who you know can really see you in this season and bear witness to your story and encourage you and speak truth into you. So protect when you need to, allow yourself to be vulnerable where you can.
Yeah.
So good.
Really great. I heard slow down your thoughts, get curious, and then identify safe people, who are deserving of speaking in and you giving weight to their opinions, right? Like that discernment that comes with curiosity. Oh, well, I know we've talked a lot about just the practice and, the overarching just ethos of this world. And one of our favorite questions to land on kind of brings it back to you, Caroline. And being that this was like from the start where your heart was planted and you knew, as you said, like this was my story and I wanted to help people move forward through this, which is such a beautiful testimony. We just want to bring it back to you to land on today. And so I'm curious, what does wellness look like for you in your life today?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that is such like a big question. What does wellness look like? I think it would, to use one word, it would probably be like attunement, because wellness doesn't always feel good. So for example, one of the things I'm challenging lately is screen time. Cause when my screen time's up, like I'm not well. And so one of the things, if you know, sounds about right.
Yowza.
So, wellness looks like for me lately, trying to be really cognizant of when I have just that automatic urge to reach for my phone and just like open it up. And instead I say, like, Caroline, plant yourself right here and now, do some grounding, attune to this feeling, this urge, and like redirect to be present. But that doesn't like feel good. Like for like the first 5 minutes of trying not to engage in this urge to like get on my phone, I'm like,
it's like I'm an addict.
And I just think that's a really, literally.
Gosh.
And so I just think that's an important differentiation that's been so helpful in my own journey, is that truly like wellness doesn't always feel super good in the moment. And that's the difference between disordered eating and authentic wellness. Is disordered eating will always feel good short term, horrible long term. True wellness will feel probably not great short term, but will feel really good and therapeutic and like grounding long term. So that's just one very specific aspect of where I am trying to attune to myself and cultivate more wellness in my life.
Amazing. Very relatable too.
Glad I'm not alone.
Oh gosh.
Screen time is real. Oh.
Real.
Well, we're so grateful for your time and attention, Caroline. Sam, if you want to close us out with any final thoughts, we just couldn't be more excited about the conversations that are going to stem from our conversation here, and just for your care and attention to the people that you serve. We're lucky to have you in our community, Caroline. So really grateful for your taking the time for this episode.
Absolutely.
That is so kind. Thank you, Emily.
Yeah. And, I always share this with the clients in the space. Take what you need, leave the rest, and come back to it when you feel ready. Healing is on your own timing. Also, just a gentle reminder to those listening, these are our sole opinions expressed here. And so please know that this is not to serve as a replacement for therapy or just, under the licensed counsel. These are opinions and these are from our stories and our experience. And please don't be afraid to seek help. If you are in a crisis, there are amazing crisis resources. And so we hope that this conversation will meet you where you're at bless you in ways that only you know. And Caroline, thank you again for joining us today and sharing your wisdom on this topic.
Yeah, well, thank y'all for having me. I cannot wait to see what season 1 holds for you all and all of the amazing conversations you guys are having with others. So I can't wait to listen. And thank you guys for, using your creativity and your thoughtfulness in the creation of this podcast. It was an honor to be on here today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Of course.
All right, we'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for joining us.